Welcome everybody to our session with Dr. Towanda Harris and Nita Creekmore. The data speaks for itself, connections and tools that ignite hope for all students. I am Abby Gillis, a former English teacher and current humanities director in Massachusetts and a tech team co-leader for the gathering. We encourage you to view the session directly from its YouTube page. Put that up right now for everybody. So that you can live chat along with presenters and viewers. Find the YouTube link on our channel at the EdCollab or at gathering.theedcollab.com. If you don't see the chat, please refresh your browser. We're not in person together, so your chats mean a lot to the presenters. Please actively post responses, questions, comments. You can also respond on other viewers' comments too. We are a community of educators here today, so please share and connect with one another. The gathering is an inclusive and affirming environment. We'll be actively monitoring the chat, so please make sure that your comments are helpful and in community with one another. The gathering has always been free to attend. If you feel inspired by this session, which I am absolutely sure you will, we ask that you visit our charity page and pay the joy forward. Without further ado, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Towanda Harris and Nita Creekmore. And take this away. Here we go. There they are. Sorry about that. Welcome, Dr. Towanda Harris and Nita Creekmore.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody.
Yes, welcome, welcome. So we'll go ahead and jump right in. As educators, you know, we always over-prepare, and we have been very, very thoughtful as to really having us to rethink what this idea of data and hope have in common. Mm-hmm. So we are going to have a conversation. This is going to be informal. We love the engagement in the chat. The keynote, Lorena and Roberto, were amazing. And so we hope that same energy comes into our session. But we are going to talk about the connection between data and hope and making sure that our students are centered and that they are supported and that we are narrating the positive and leveraging their strengths in all that we do. Mm-hmm. So a little bit about us. For those that do not know me, I wear many hats as educators. We wear many hats. I started as a third grade teacher, started my educational journey as a third grade teacher. And that probably was the most humbling position that I had, because students, they don't have filters, but they have a foundation of love for you. And so that is where I think I earned my stripes first. I'm also a professor, and I've been a literacy coach, and I've written a book in 2019, published a book with Heinemann Publishing entitled The Right Tools. And I have a family, my husband, as well as 3 children. So when you think about just this idea of different lenses that we look through as educators, oh my goodness, I have a lot of different lenses that I'm able to look through to make sure that my biases are checked, as well as I am intentional about centering students.
I loved hearing about that, Towanda. Like third grade teacher, that's one thing I did not know about you. So I have to write that down. Okay. So hello, everybody. My name is Nita Creekmore. I have the handle of Love Teach Bless as well. Right now I'm currently a literacy educator. This is my, I guess, 21st year in education. I know you're in the 20-something too, Towanda. 7 years as an instructional coach, 14 years now in the classroom. And I've returned to the classroom after being an in-school coach. And it's so rewarding. So I am an instructional coach consultant now. I've co-authored the book that you see on the screen, Every Connection Matters, with my husband, Michael Creekmore. It's all about like building relationships inside the classroom and outside the classroom. I'm also a mother to 4 amazing kids ranging from like 20 to 10. So I have 3 teenagers they teach me so much about
Oh,
life. Let me
and there's
tell
no
you.
manual at all.
There is no manual. I learned. I told my son the other day, I've never had a 20-year-old before, so I'm learning. We're learning.
Mm-hmm.
A wife to an amazing husband, Michael, and like as you were saying, Towanda, like I am a lover of data, and not just any kind of data, like data that really sees the humans in front of us, and also seeing myself as a human as well, especially like re-entering into the classroom. It gives me another view of what it can be, and what it can look like. And so I hope that like in this session that you are grounded in hope, hope in the data that we see each and every day. So
Yes.
thank you.
And, back to kind of this idea of, how passionate we are when it comes to data and ensuring that we're using it to support our students. It makes me think about the conversation that we had to even frame this session. We know that in education, we don't often get professional development around ways to humanize the data. We often get it around ways to group students, to make decisions based on what lessons they're going to start at, how to best use the packaged curriculum that we have been handed. But I just don't recall in my 20 plus years really having sessions that were dedicated to looking at the data, but like a puzzle, taking different data points to piece them together to then talk about ways to best support our students. And so that was our thinking when we came to, what we'll talk about. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but the first thing we'll talk about is what is data? The next, how do we ignite hope for teachers? If you are in a space in which you're not often supported to even think through that lens or ask those critical questions, how are you going to be hopeful as a teacher? And then we'll talk about the connection between data and hope. And then, of course, igniting hope for our students. And this last piece that we wanted to close out with, how do we engage families and communities to make sure that data, those conversations aren't just held in a setting of the school setting, but making sure that we are involving families. I always say this, we are better together. And so with that being said, better together does not just mean the teachers in the school, the students in the school. Better together means that we're talking about families, we're talking about communities, we're talking about things so much bigger than just our students. So we wanted to kind of start off with this idea of we did a Google search, what is data? And according to vocabulary.com, data is information such as facts and numbers used to analyze something or make decisions. Here's another definition on Merriam-Webster's website. Data is factual information, such as measurements or statistics used as a basis or reasoning, discussion, or calculation. And so I think about just my time in the classroom. Often we use this definition to engage with data, to make decisions. But I want us to pause because we're all in this session for a reason. We want to rethink what it means to look at data through a lens of hope. And so looking at these two definitions that are on vocabulary.com as well as Webster.com, I want to ask you these two questions. Number one, what do you think is missing from these definitions? And which components connect with the humanity of teachers and students? So I'll pause for maybe about 30 seconds.
Yeah, they already started sharing in the chat.
Oh, yes. Awesome.
Yeah. Like more qualitative data. They wish your work was more valued. Thank you, Joey.
Awesome. I'm trying to create a cultural lens. I wish, oh, I love it. Context is missing. Data needs to be discussed in context. Missing children, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality is, if we are not intentional on centering it back on our students, we could fall into the trap of only looking at the numbers. And we'll talk a little bit later around the different types of data. And I know
Mm-hmm.
just with our experience in the classroom, we often talk about one type of data more than the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Towanda. It also makes you think about how many times the urgency in education, right? The urgency that we're just moving to numbers and not seeing our students, but sometimes we're not seeing our teachers too. So like igniting that hope for teachers and beginning with the teachers in front of us is so critical. And so when I think about teachers, I also think about relationships. And relationships are the foundation. The relationships are the foundation of for us as teachers and also for students. And so we want to make sure that we're igniting that hope for teachers and beginning with them. So that pours over to our students. And it's not that our students aren't important, but we have to start with like the self first, right? We know the students are the core, they're the heart, but we truly want to begin with the teacher to teacher relationships there, because we know that the relationships with teachers are important as well, right? Thinking about that as the foundation. And we hear relationships. Here's the thing. We hear it all the time, right? Towanda, like we hear build relationships, build relationships, build relationships. And it's like that doing part that often gets missed.
Mhm.
And so one thing that I want to just really highlight is that trust piece. Sharing data, and I don't know about you, but when we used to share our data, it can be really vulnerable, especially when you have that deficit mindset, when you're in a group that looks at just the deficit of your kids and you're sharing the data. And oftentimes it's only one data point from a standardized test. And then you're just like, well, there's more to my students. There's more to me as the teacher than just this one data point, right?
Yes.
And so we want to establish that trust amongst our teacher teams, trust amongst pulling other people into our teacher teams. Like we want to make sure we're adding in our multilingual teacher to the table, making sure we're adding in our gifted teacher to the table. And usually teachers work in their silos. So we want to bring us together in community. So trust is important there. Making sure that we're looking at data as not just numbers, but that human aspect, those younger folks in front of us, and then even the human aspect in ourselves. So we want to make sure we're also digging into authenticity. Who am I as a teacher? Am I bringing my full self to the table? Am I sharing what I really believe about data rather than going with the status quo,
Oh
right?
my goodness. Yes.
Don't you see that a lot? A lot of times it's like,
Yes.
I'm just going with the flow because that's what
Mhm.
everyone else is doing, rather than saying, hey, I want to bring some other data, informal data, some of that street data we'll talk about a little bit later, to the table. It makes sense. It makes sense for me as the teacher, but also for the humans in front of me. Because teaching can be challenging. I'm back in the classroom now and I'm like, it can be challenging. And so one thing we know is we need each other. We need that community. We have this, we're in this together mindset for our students, for the health and wealth of ourselves and the health and wealth of our students. And so one thing I want to talk about is some questions that we can ask ourselves in order to humanize ourselves as teachers. A lot of times when we're talking and having data talks, we just go right to the data. We don't even think about what is our well-being as teachers in this game. And so some of the questions that you can ask, which helps you to slow way down, because we move too fast. I'll say that a lot. I have so much urgency. We move too fast. To slow way down is like, ask your teammates, like, how are you doing personally? How are you doing professionally? Right? We want to make sure we're showing our best selves for ourselves, but also for our students.
Yes.
Right? That human aspect. And then working together as a team. Like, how are we going to move our students in order for them to grow? What are some things we can do? Thinking about an asset-based thinking is like, what is the amazing things that our students are doing? Right? Not just that deficit mindset. Like, what are the things that they're doing well? What are some things we need to change? Right? One thing I often dig into is seeing the genius in our students. Like Dr. Goldie Muhammad says, like, what is the genius in our students? I'm not just talking about academics, which is important. I'm talking about the genius in them as people, as humans, right? Yes. And seeing that with them as well. It's all about that community piece, and that's huge. So asking some of these questions help with that. We often forget about community. So I'm going to share a quote from Every Connection Matters. Sometimes we forget about the power of community. When we are on our own island doing our own thing, we forget that people need other people to thrive. We were made up to be in community. That's how we were created. And so we can't forget each other. We can't forget about each other. We have to utilize each other's gifts, each other's geniuses in order to be who we want to be for our students. And so, Towanda, I know you have a tool that I love so much that I want you to share.
Okay. So, you bring up so many great points about this idea of like, who do we have on the team that can be leveraged to support our students best? I always ask the question, how are we setting our students up for success? And, I think about my first year teaching. I honestly, just being full transparent, what happens on this in this session stays in this session. But in all transparency, I don't know if I truly set my students up for success, because I battled between, I'm given this package curriculum, I'm told to do this and say this and use this assessment, and this is what determines your grouping, all of these things. And so there is still a lot of unlearning that I need to do in order to make sure that our students are seen, that they're valued, and that they are heard in their learning journey. And so this tool that is in the book, The Right Tools, it was just this brain dump of all of the roles. And this is not an exhaustive list, but all of the roles that could possibly be in your school building that could help support students. And I know, just thinking about my grade level team meeting, or when we would have our weekly collaborative meetings with our grade level or our content area, because of scheduling purposes, or, maybe it wasn't prioritized, everyone was not given an equal seat at the table.
100%.
What do I mean by that? It is a matter of you're there, but we're not really giving you space to talk about the strategies that are best for students with special needs, with ELL students, with students with reading gaps, or you make any group that you want, or talk about any subgroup that you want. We did not leave space truly to have those conversations. And it wasn't a matter of just having the conversations. It was like, okay, what are we going to do next? Yeah. I think about me being in the classroom, my first year teaching. We had a very high population of students that spoke Spanish. And we had a wonderful, amazing ELL teacher. And she was amazing. And she would attend our meetings, but she was like a bystander. We never, as a school, prioritized her amazing input that she would have in her classroom. And when she worked with students that needed her support, we didn't carry that over into our general education space. So it was kind of like we were working in silos. And the problem with working in silos is that we don't keep that idea of being better together. Right. And so when we think about hope, as Lorena said earlier, hope is not just words. It is an action. It is something that we have to actively seek. Thinking of something that's bigger outside of ourselves and looking at these roles that are on this chart. How are we leveraging the individuals that are in our building to give them equal or equitable speaking space, or, for lack of a better term, but input into the lives of looking at data points to make sure that our students are achieving?
100%. When I hear you talking, Towanda, like what comes up for me is that's their genius, right? Like
Yes.
as a teacher, that's their genius, and may not have that genius. So bringing their voice into that is so critical, so critical. I love that tool. Like that tool is when I told you when I saw, I was like, yes, I'm pulling that into my school. We're gonna pull it right at the table. Everybody has a chair. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's take some time to stop and jot. Let's pause, think about what's coming up for us. When you think about communities, like maybe your belief system, the community's belief system with that you're in, how can we invite others into these data talks, into these data dives? And then also you can share in the chat, like how can we move into a more asset-based mindset as it relates to students and data? I'll give us a couple of seconds. Yes, their voice is their genius. Thank you for sharing. 100%. How can we invite others into these data dives? One thing that comes up for me too is that mindset is everything, right? And thinking through these data talks, data dives, or we're all at the table, like mindset is everything. And the belief system about community is everything. That truly comes up for me. Thank you, Julia.
Julia, that is powerful what you just shared in the chat. Making sure that students don't feel punished for whatever the data reveals. I think about just this one particular school I was working with, and I wasn't a part of this area of support, which I wished that I was, but students would take a test. I won't name the test, but they would take a test and it would shoot out a reading level. And whatever the reading level was, students were given a card to then go into the library that was organized by reading level. Stay with me. Don't clutch your pearls. Don't
I'm
cringe.
with you.
I'm trying not to do it too. So they walk into the library and you're talking about these students that they want to just have a reading life. They want to just explore and just lose themselves in a book, and they're told, nope, your reading level puts you in this corner.
Yeah.
And you can only choose books that are over here. And Julia, I know you are your heart is hurting because you are an amazing person in the librarian space, but I just think about how, to that point of data being harmful to students or even being punished. And I would say that that was a form of punishment. I'm restricting you to one part of the library because of what this one test said was your reading level.
100%. And I'm looking at what Dr. K. Orange Jones, thank you for sharing too, is saying is like, it's a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift because we're so used to having these systems of data of like, here's your box, right? And you're going to stay in this box. And then this, the standardized data box, I would say, I was in that box too, Towanda, of like, standardized tests weren't my thing. They just were not my thing. It did not show anything about my genius. And they weren't meant for me. And so I'll that's a whole nother box to open up later, but that they weren't meant for me. So, yeah, Joey, the boxes are still there. And so we have to see how we can bring hope, how we can do that. So here's another quote. I'm sharing this quote from the book Street Data. So Barchet asked this question: why doesn't data analysis work? All three researchers explain that while data is helpful in pinpointing students as weaknesses, mistakes, and gaps, it doesn't tell teachers what to do about them. And it doesn't. And so Barchet, on several recent studies, had examined the effectiveness of teacher teams analyzing these standardized test data that I told you I didn't do too hot at. And the research showed that in doing the data this way, that it really didn't show much improvement or minimal improvement in student learning, right? And so despite the huge investments that society puts on these standardized tests, they didn't show a lot of improvement there. And so I always say this, if you're going to be a data collector, then do something with that data, right? Bring people to the table, do something with that data. If you're not, then don't do nothing. Like, don't even collect the data. Like, don't take time to do that. Because when I say data collector, I'm not talking about just standardized tests. We're not talking about just standardized. We're talking about intentional data that shows the holistic person in front of us, the human in front of us, right? And so when we talk about data, we're talking about, why are we collecting the data? What's the purpose? How are we going to do that, right? What are we going to use? Having those conversations amongst each other versus going with the status quo. And so, Towanda, you have another really useful tool there in rooting in purpose. Chat about your tool.
Yeah. So, one of the pieces I wish my administrators or my school focused on when I first started teaching was this idea of understanding the different types of data. I just knew that I'm giving an assessment, and we were going to talk about the results of the assessment at some point. We were going to put their names on a sticky note and start to move their names around by groups as a grade level planning team meeting, which, don't get me started on how, you lose the humanity in just students' lives when it boils down to your initials on a sticky note, and I'm just moving it around. And then having exit tickets and diagnostic assessments and summative assessments at the end of the year, all of these different things, all of these different ways that we were told to assess, we didn't really have that conversation around how to use all of those pieces to put together this puzzle, put together the finished, I guess, plan on ways to best support our students and meet them where they are. Dr. Orange Jones, in the chat, you put, how do we make sure that we're not just using one piece of data? How do we make sure that we are properly, using the data to support our students? And so with that being said, I created this tool in which it just outlines different types and the purpose and gives examples. Because in my experience, just when working with teachers, when you misuse a type of data, you sometimes do not get the proper next steps or understand the next steps that exist. For example, I've seen exit tickets be used as a formative assessment. So at the end of a lesson, we're talking, and then I say, okay, all right, everyone take out a sheet of paper. I want you to jot down 3 points that you learned from the lesson, or I'm going to, give you a text, and then you just write down what the inference is, whatever it is. And then I take it, and then I score it. Instead of using it in a way that helps to inform my next steps, not only with the student, but also with the class. I think about my daughter's frustration. She loves to write. She is just a writer. She just absolutely loves to write. And one year, her English teacher said, we are going to use graphic organizers. And so she hands out a graphic organizer to everyone in the class. And before they could write, they had to put all of their thoughts and ideas in this graphic organizer. And I remember my daughter having a hard time with that because her mind is, I'm a writer. She's writing all over the place. And she's like, now I'm having to take all of my thoughts and fit them in a box. But it gets better. So then she turns in her graphic organizer, and the teacher, with her red pen, starts to grade and score the graphic organizer for spelling, for sentence structure, all of those things. And you can imagine this sixth grader and her frustration around what the purpose was of her spending time getting her ideas out on paper.
That a lot comes up for me there as a writer, and getting, first of all, getting all those marks on a paper as a writer. I don't know what, for me, that red pen, I'm like, throw the red pen away.
Oh
I'm
my
gonna need
gosh.
you not to
Oh my
like put no
goodness.
red
Oh
pen.
my
Let's have some
goodness.
discussion. Let's have some conversation about the writing, but please do not put a red pen to my writing. So go ahead.
So I'll turn it over to you to talk about the street data. You want to just kind of go through?
Yes. So when we're talking about levels of data, we're talking about this wonderful book. If you don't have this book, along with our books, we'd love for you to get ours, but definitely get street data. Add street data to your books and making sure you're using it. I have it right here. Like, it's one of those books that just you keep going back to. But then you have like the level 1, level 2, and level 3 types of data. The first one is like that satellite data. And we're talking about more of that above the view, like far above the view, not getting down to the trenches, right? You have that like standardized test data. Map data gets a little closer in. But when we're talking about street data, we're talking about that humanizing data that's grounded in relationship building, right? We're talking about that data that you're like, I'm sitting next to a kid versus like at home grading that paper. We're talking about I'm sitting next to the kid as they're learning and taking in data. I'm listening to them having conversations in their groups, and that's data that I'm collecting, right? I'm doing some kid watching there. I'm finding a holistic view of my students. So then when I talk about my students, I know my students. It's not just from a standardized test that has their name and their student number on there, right? And so that's the type of data that is humanizing data, is that street data right there.
So we can go into a quick stop and jot. I know we are really, really close to time, and I want to make sure that Nita is able to really just tie the bow in our session with an amazing, piece that is very, very crucial to making sure that we are humanizing data. I'll give you maybe a couple of seconds to think about just different types of data and what data informs your instruction and how you can humanize the data to data you use for students. All right. Well, while you're thinking about that, to make sure we get through, like I said, we always over prepare, aren't we, educators by trade? Okay, so I want to just quickly talk about this idea of students owning their learning journey, and oftentimes we in education, we have conversations about giving information to students. We want to share that information, but we don't always have professional development or those important conversations around agency. I'm giving you, I'm sharing with you the data, but then what are you going to do to be a part of the journey to help to, track your data, or to have conversations on where those milestones, how you are progressing through the data. And so when you're working with students, and this is a free tool, and from my book, it is a goal setting tool, and it is one that promotes student agency. And so the first part of one of the benefits of any tool, whether you use this tool or not, setting goals and creating bite-sized steps to help them get there is powerful. I think about me when I am trying to get in shape or to lose weight or whatever my journey is when it comes to my physical fitness. Looking at all the way down the road sometimes could be very overwhelming. So if I have a trainer, a personal trainer, that personal trainer will give me that bite-sized milestones, those bite-sized milestones to help to encourage me along the way. And I will continue to have conversations throughout if I am on track, off track, if we need to make adjustments. Also, this tool helps students to understand how each day's work connects to their goals. Sometimes I think about, well, going back to Dr. Goldie Muhammad's, her historically responsive framework, that criticality piece. And yes, the criticality talks about how students are then speaking out against injustices and all of the things in the world, but it also speaks to this learning. How does this learning apply to their world? How does it apply to my end goal, or how does it apply to the goals that I have set for myself, that we have agreed upon? And so helping us to allow students to really grapple with, I'm doing this, but why? It also helps to ensure that goals are measurable. And lastly, it allows for moments of reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And so also, I want to make sure that we are very thoughtful around the balance of the types of assessment that we are doing and that we are exposing our students to. A couple of months ago, I did a webinar with Lorena, and we were talking about this idea of data, because we could talk data all day, making sure that we're humanizing it, but making sure also that we are not using data, as was mentioned in the chat, to harm students. And so it's very important that as we are thinking through the types of data that we are using with our students, thinking of a good balance. And so this is just a quick tool to jot down, what am I using for my diagnostic? What am I using for my informal? What am I using for my formal? And you might find that you are using more of one type of assessment than the other. And that again could be something that could empower your conversation, to bring it to your grade level, to have that tough conversation. But that is the data that you definitely could use to say, hey team, I really think that we need to incorporate a little bit more of this to make sure that we are not just using one piece of data to make decisions for our students.
I absolutely love that tool. One thing I am going to also add in too, and someone mentioned this earlier, is igniting that hope for families and caregivers, like bringing them to the table, because they're absolutely our partners in this education game, right? And so something I'm going to share with you is this family communications checklist. And one thing of having families come to the table is we're even moving to that next level, right? We want to make sure that we're being immersed in that street data and that data that Towanda was talking about, that culmination of data. But bringing them to the table means that we have to communicate with our folks, right? We got to communicate with our parents, allowing them to have a seat at the table and thinking about their mindset where school is concerned, right? They have their own belief system about school. They've had their own experiences about school. So allowing them to move from that mindset to a mindset where I want you at the table. You are a part of this process, right? And so we have to get more consistent about communicating with our parents and bringing them to the table. That's an extra role we want to add to that checklist that Towanda sent earlier, is bringing them into the table. That ignites hope for them, but it ignites hope for us and our students as well, to know that we're all in this together. So those family and caregivers have a place in this education field, in the education world. It's about community, and they are also a part of that community. And so that checklist is there because it helps us to be consistent. It helps us to bring them in. It helps us to remind us to bring them in, right? Because we need that reminder, but also bringing them into the conversation alongside their students. And I see us lifting up students and making sure that students have agency there, but also bring their families in, because they also are a piece of data that they know their students. That's their babies. Their babies come to us every single day, making sure that we're honoring them as well in the process.
And I think about all of the wonderful acronyms we have in education. We have an acronym, and I didn't realize how many acronyms we have until I started talking to my non-educator uh, caretakers. And they're like, what does EIP and, all of these things, SAT, all of these acronyms that we use, but making sure that that is
Yeah.
not a barrier as well, and that you are mindful, because it could be very intimidating. Like you said, how are we welcoming in our families? And
Yes.
so I'll end with this quote. I know we only have just a few more minutes. End with this quote. And this hopefully could tie the bow on us really thinking of ways to make sure that we are humanizing the data. It says effective teaching comes from closely attending to students' needs, being mindful of their strengths, and choosing and designing instruction that meets them where they are and then moves them ahead. So, as we close, we definitely want to highlight or bring your attention back to the two different nonprofit organizations that the Ed Collab is supporting for the fall gathering. If you enjoyed our session, or if you definitely have, enjoyed the keynote, or you'll attend any other sessions, it is, a simple, not having 5 cups of coffee at Starbucks to
Mhm.
pour. You can, if it's on your heart to give, here is the QR code to find out more information for each of the organizations.
Mhm.
And then we want to leave you with our contact information. This is just a little bit more about just us on each of our social media platforms. We really kind of share tools, we
Mhm.
share our thinking, we
Yes.
highlight other educators that are doing this work. So, if
Mhm.
you're in it on any of these platforms, please go ahead and follow us. And
Yes.
anything else you want to add?
No, thank you so much for joining and being so engaged in the chat. I love it so much. This is what community is about. And so we appreciate y'all joining this session, and we hope to see y'all on some of our platforms soon.
Thank you so much to Dr. Towanda Harris and to Nita Creekmore for this amazing session, reminding us that students aren't just data points, that really humanizing it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank
joining.
you.
So for the next sessions, if you can pop over to session 3, we have session with Amy Ellis and Katie Hollenberg. Hope is a read aloud, talking with young readers about LGBTQ inclusive books. And we also have Garcia Pena and Tracy Flores with the Igniting Hope, a virtual celebration with the Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival. Excuse me. So please join one of our next sessions. And also please remember to pay the joy forward, as Dr. Towanda Harris and Nita Creekmore just talked about. Thank you so much, everybody.